their plan.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, hey. They all lay down their jive just like a natural man. Hey.
BD women, BD women, you know they sure is rough.
What you talking about?
Ooh, they real rough, girl. BD women, they know they's rough. They drink all plenty of whiskey, and they sure will strut their stuff.
Oh, those BD women, you know they works and makes their dough.
You gotta have the dough, honey.
You gotta have the
dough. BD women, you know they work and make their dough.
Yeah.
And when they get ready to spend it, they know they got to go.
Welcome. Can we get another round of applause for our amazing performers? You'll see more of them later, but we have Jarvis Durrell, Jade Jones, and Dion McLean-Freeney here tonight. They're all stellar performers. So good evening and welcome to REVERB, a Queer History Experience Part 2, The Famous Lady Lovers with Cookie Woolner, presented by the American LGBTQ+ Museum in partnership with Culture Lab LIC. My name is Essie Lucier. I am the Director of Public Programs and Partnerships at the American LGBTQ+ Museum. I'll pass it over to my friend Tess Howsam, who's the Artistic Director at Culture Lab, just to say a couple words, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. The rain tried to keep us away, but we were not deterred. So thank you all for coming out today. I'm Tess. I run Culture Lab's artistic programming here. So if you enjoy this, let us know. We also, this weekend, it's Culture Lab's Pride Weekend. So if you are available and feel like doing something, Saturday we have our Trans Pride Palooza. There will be 84 trans vendors here selling their amazing wares. It'll be amazing. And awesome, amazing performers that whole day outside. We're gonna turn the outside into a festival energy. So please come and spend your Saturday with us. It's obviously free to enter and enjoy. And then Saturday we keep it going with the Pride Market and more amazing queer artists on the stage. So come back, it's all free. Thank you.
Thanks, Tess. Thank you for hosting us, Culture Lab LIC. It's such a pleasure to be here for the second REVERB. How many of you were here for the first REVERB? Any? Oh, yes, our executive director and his husband. The American LGBTQ+ Museum was here. This is a 3-part series in partnership with Culture Lab LIC. So if you like this one or you like the first, make sure you come out on August 14th for the next REVERB. I'm Suhaili Bautista Carolina. I'm the Chief of Programs at the American LGBTQ+ Museum, and we're so glad that you're here with us. For those of you who have attended ALM programs in the past, welcome and welcome back. And for those of you encountering the museum for the first time, I just want to tell you a little bit about the museum. The American LGBTQ+ Museum is a new collaboration dedicated to preserving, researching, and sharing LGBTQ+ history and culture. The museum's vision is a world in which all people work toward and experience the joy of queer liberation. How many of you want that vision to come true? Yes. In our new home, which will open on the Upper West Side in 2027, will be New York's newest museum, and we will tell the story of queer peoples in this country, past and present, and in the continuum of time that connects us to our rich and powerful queer legacy. Yes. The museum will be a beacon for people around the country and around the world who haven't yet tasted queer liberation. It will be a space of celebration, commemoration, and deep meaning, a space where the connection to our ancestors will be strong and queer magic real. ALM will also be a space for activists, partnering with others who work toward the liberation of LGBTQ+ peoples, we know we need it, and supporting the work of rising generations who will fight for new possibilities for queer peoples and for all people. And you do not have to wait until 2027 to be part of it. You can attend our public programs like you're doing now, our traveling exhibitions, the next one, Queer Justice, will be in Boston in October. Tell a friend about us, follow us on social, become a founding member, have your name on our donor wall, subscribe to our newsletter, join our book club. There's so many ways to plug in with the museum and be part of our unfolding journey, and I hope that you will. There are some staff members in the audience. Can you raise your hands, please? Awesome. If you want to learn more about the museum, please find us and talk to us, ask us questions. What is this? I didn't know about this. I've never heard of this. We're here to answer all of your questions and hope that you will tap us so we can share more.
Thank you. And bringing us back to the moment here in the present. Hi. REVERB, just to say a little bit about it, is an immersive program series that connects the echoes of queer history to the present through captivating history lessons and live performances. Each event features a blend of lectures, music, dance, and interactive experiences, all set within the casual speakeasy atmosphere, such as this one. So you can see why Culture Lab is the perfect space for something like this collaboration. So just to say a couple of words about our performers, to introduce them. Jarvis Durrell is a two-time Emmy Award-winning writer, NYC nightlife icon, and creator of She Has Had It, ! Is the handle. Jade Jones is a multifaceted performer dedicated to storytelling that challenges norms and centers joy, and also creates music under the artist name Lydia Fischel. And Dion McLean Freeney is a pianist, composer, lyricist, choral and musical director, arranger, singer, and teaching artist off-Broadway and in multiple churches. Incredible. And now to introduce our lecturer, I will give it back to Sue Haley.
Thank you. Okay, I'm last, I promise. To open our program, it is now my pleasure to introduce our host lecturer, Cookie Woolner. Cookie Woolner is the author of the 2023 book and the star of tonight, The Famous Lady Lovers, Black Women and Queer Desire Before Stonewall. Yes, let's clap for that book. It's the inspiration behind this program. It received an honorable mention for the 2024 Best Book in Black Women's History from the Association of Black Women's Historians. She has been invited to present about her book at over 20 events, including at prestigious institutions like the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and the American LGBTQ+ Museum, as well as on the local news, WREG. She's currently an advisor for the Gay Harlem Renaissance exhibit at the New York Historical Society that opens in October. Thank you for putting that in your bio. You should all come check it out. We'll definitely be a part of it if you're based in New York. And Cookie is the editor-in-chief of the forthcoming Schlager Anthology of LGBTQ History, a 2-volume collection of essential primary sources aimed at students. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Cookie Woolner to the stage.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I'm so happy to be here. Hello. All right, I first, of course, wanted to say thank you to everybody at the museum. I've done a few virtual events for them before, but this is my first in-person one. So thank you so much to Lucy and to Sue Haley and to Ben and to everybody else from the museum. You're doing such important work, and it's just so great to know that you're going to have a brick and mortar space opening up in this current moment we're in, right, when there's so much censorship and repression around queer history. So it's just so important to have these institutions and have spaces like this where everybody can come together. So I also just want to, of course, note that today is Juneteenth, right? 160 years of freedom for African Americans from the institution of slavery. And what I'll be talking about today is very much about freedom and the ways that Black queer women created the relationships they wanted, had the freedom to move around the country and spread their music to people in the North and the South. So this is very much about freedom and the freedom that queer Black women created for themselves in the 1920s and 30s, especially. So my talk tonight will be drawing from my book, The Famous Lady Lovers, which is mostly about the queer blues women, but it's also about everyday Black queer women in the 20s and 30s, and I'll be including a few of them as well. So we have a couple famous blues women here and a few women who aren't quite as well known who we'll also be getting to today. So I'm also, of course, want to acknowledge that it's Pride Month, and so in commemoration of the Stonewall Uprising, of course, there's much going on in this month. It's important to remember that queer history, of course, doesn't begin with Stonewall, right? It's now seen as kind of a moment demarking the beginning of the modern gay rights movement, but of course, queer people have always existed. And so I'll be focusing on several earlier decades, talking about how the 20s especially is a very crucial time for the creation of queer enclaves, especially in places like Harlem and Bronzeville in Chicago. All right, so I'm going to get started here. I'm going to start by just introducing the term I'm using here. So lady lovers is a very common term that Black and white queer women used to identify themselves in the 20s and 30s, along with other terms such as women lovers, for example. It was very rare for women to identify as a lesbian until really the 1960s or onward. So we have a lot of different terminology for earlier periods. And one of the major kind of things I realized when I was doing research for my book, which began as a dissertation, so over a decade ago, I was doing a lot of research for this, was that the Black entertainment industry, the popular entertainment industry, was a really crucial space for Black women to meet one another, and also just to have an opportunity to do work that didn't involve, domestic work, physical work. So the fact that thousands of Black women were able to have jobs in the entertainment field allowed them to have a lot of freedom, economic opportunities, the possibilities to travel and to meet other women, and to kind of, take part in new queer relationships and identities that they really helped disseminate to really the nation and beyond here. So this is just a quote I love. This is where the title for my book comes from. So this is a picture of Maud Russell, who was a popular performer and dancer at this time period. And she was actually interviewed for a book about Josephine Baker, who we just really kind of know a few rumors about her having relationships with other women. But in this book, we have this juicy quote here from Maud Russell where she talks about, within the context of being in the entertainment world, lesbians weren't very well accepted in showbiz. They were often called bulldykers. She recalled that girls needed tenderness, so we had girl friendships, the famous lady lovers. I guess we were bisexual is what you would call it today. So I found this quote obviously stuck with me, right? I was like, maybe that'll be a good title for my book someday. So many years later, I'm so thrilled that I was able to come to fruition here. And also, I just love the term lady lovers because this notion of being a lady was often really reserved for, middle and upper class white women, right? For other women to kind of want to be referred to with the respect of a lady was often, disregarded. So I love the term lady lovers for kind of centering, the humanity and womanhood of these women who loved women in this time period when it was an incredibly bold move to, have a relationship with women in this moment. There's a little talk about how, bisexuality became a little bit trendy in this time period. But, this is still the Jim Crow era. Queerness was generally pathologized, seen as something that was criminal, something unnatural. So there was a lot of repression that women had to kind of push through to have these relationships that they wanted. All right, so I'm a historian, so sorry, there's going to be a little more historical context laid out before we really get into the blues, because that's what we do here in History Lands. This is a picture of Ethel Waters, we'll be talking about a little bit. I love this picture of her here. So I'm just going to briefly go over a few of kind of the larger historical reasons that the 1920s becomes very essential for the creation of Black queer women's social networks, as I often call them, in this time period here. So, of course, first we have the Great Migration. We have this mass migration of Southern African Americans to northern and western cities, beginning with World War I. And this will, drastically change the racial demographics of northern cities. Many people coming to the north, thought there'd be a lot of new freedoms and opportunities for them. And unfortunately, many people were met with, with violence, with more discrimination in the north and disappointment in that as well. But for other women, the possibility to kind of leave their families of origin and their nosy neighbors and, within the anonymity of cities, take part in queer relationships was very essential as well. So the Great Migration plays a very large role in making Harlem become known as kind of, the mecca for Black life by early 1920s, if not earlier, as well as other cities like Chicago and Philadelphia as well. And then, of course, we have Prohibition, right? So alcohol is illegal to purchase for all of the 1920s. And the 18th Amendment, passing Prohibition, was actually the first amendment to take away the rights of Americans. And you can imagine they did not like that very much. So people really enjoyed gathering in speakeasies like we are tonight and, enjoying taking part in bootleg illegal alcohol. And beyond that, it was kind of like, I kind of enjoy breaking this taboo. What else do you have, right? So we're seeing a lot of, interracial, same-sex dancing, flirtation, going on in speakeasy spaces. There's a lot of spaces also, especially in private apartments that are often run by very entrepreneurial Black women who are throwing parties. There's often blues music there as well. Sometimes there's gambling. Sometimes there might be some sex work, all types of different kind of illicit activities. But again, people really kind of enjoyed flouting prohibition and, going against this repression, this, taking away this right to imbibe alcohol. So that's another important factor, kind of creating spaces in which lady lovers could find one another. And we also just have kind of a growing general interest in sexuality in the 1920s. We can think of Cole Porter singing about how anything goes in this era right after World War I and the tragedy of it and the loss of life. There's kind of a new interest in hedonism in some ways. And we're also seeing more discussions around sexuality on Broadway. We have people like Mae West talking about, she has a play called Sex, about sex work, another one called Drag, about drag queens. And they both actually experience kind of censorship and repression. So the 20s is really a time of a lot of tensions. We're seeing kind of progress in some ways. New ideas around gender and sexuality are beginning to bubble up, but there's still a lot of repression. There's a lot of conservatism. It's still the Jim Crow era. There's a lot of lynchings going on in the South, which unfortunately will come up a little bit later when I discuss the experience of touring in the South for these women. And so yeah, I've been already kind of talking about this increasing sexualized consumer culture going on. And then of course we have, more visibility for women in the public sphere, the rise of feminism in the 1910s. I would say the 19th Amendment, but, Black women in the South were not able to vote right until 1965. So, but there's just more kind of conversations about feminism and women taking up more space in public at this time. And so that's another important factor here. And then as I've already mentioned, the Black popular entertainment industry is a very central site for women to gather and find one another and have relationships as well. So these are, the most of the factors that kind of create this opportunity for women. All right, and I'm just going to briefly mention a few more of these again. The Great Migration is going on. We have people traveling from the South to northern cities. This is creating these new neighborhoods in which we're seeing new kind of spaces opening up. So this is a major factor here. And then again, of course, we have the Harlem Renaissance. I just love this quote from Henry Louis Gates, where he writes that the Harlem Renaissance was surely as gay as it was Black. Not that it was exclusively either of these things. So here you have just a few of the many queer figures of the Harlem Renaissance, writers such as Nella Larson, writer Cowdy Cullen, and poet Langston Hughes, who will also come up again. And also in this world, the blues becomes very popular, especially Langston Hughes is a huge fan of Bessie Smith, and he tries to support her and go see her perform whenever he can. Then, of course, kind of going along with this, again, the more conservatism of the era, we have these concepts of slumming and primitivism are kind of like two sides of the same coin. This is this kind of tongue-in-cheek quote from Langston Hughes. He says the Negro is in vogue in the 1920s, right? As if a race of people can, be popular or trendy in a certain moment. So, white people who thought themselves progressive at the time were very kind of, obsessed and had this new fascination with Black culture. And we might think of people like Carl Van Vechten, for example, for folks who might be familiar with someone like him. Josephine Baker doing her dance in Paris in her banana skirt kind of becomes this, popular symbol of this type of kind of primitivism, this idea kind of associating people of the African diaspora with being like closer to nature and more exotic, creating this concept of slumming where white people from uptown or from the suburbs are going to clubs in Harlem, kind of sometimes even like gawking at everybody there, kind of creating a spectacle out of them, and then going home and like telling their neighbors about the wild time they had out in Harlem. So again, this is kind of another of the tensions of the era here. And this can also be seen in this, probably hard to see from here, unfortunately, but this is this map of Harlem clubs. Here we have Gladys Bentley playing at Gladys's Clam House. She was so popular, I'll talk about her later, that she actually had a club named after her here. It says Gladys Bentley wears a tuxedo and a high hat and tickles the ivories. And so this was actually, a map that was created kind of to let people know where they should go out to have a good night out on the town. So we have these kind of guides to, have a wild night out that are highlighting kind of different locations people can go to experience life in Harlem, whether they're seeing people perform. There's also some signs about like this, on this corner, you can find cocaine and, you know, all different types of activities. Again, kind of focusing on bringing white people into Harlem, which of course, you know, people who live there were not a fan of, right? They talked about how Harlem was not a zoo, it was not a spectacle, it was, you know, everyday people, it was churches, it was, you know, families. It should not be treated as something exotic or something to fetishize. So we have, again, all these kind of larger tensions going on here in the 1920s. And then just one more contextual slide before we finally get into the blues women here. This is the story that I start my book with. So this is a 1920s article from a Black newspaper in Chicago, and it has the headline, "Have we a new sex problem here?" And so I don't need to kind of go over everything about it, but basically it's a journalist who learns about a woman who's leaving her husband to live with another woman. And he's never heard of anything like this before. He's never heard of a woman getting divorced so that she can, you know, basically replace her husband with a wife. And he's shocked about this, so shocked that he thinks it might actually be like the start of a new sex problem. So I offer this here to kind of show you how in 1920, Black queer women were beginning to be visible in the Black press, in Northern Black communities, and there was often, you know, pushback from the community about this. But at the same time, these types of articles, you know, were revealing to other women that such women existed. They often gave their addresses. Often they would have parties. Sometimes there'd be violence at the parties, and cops would come and arrest people. But then they would print everybody's address in the paper, and of course, that was in some ways a way to kind of, you know, police women's behavior. But it also let other women know, like, where the queer women were hanging out. So, you know, I talk a lot about this idea of reading sources against the grain, because it's so challenging to find, you know, historical sources, especially in the first person, you know, writing by Black queer women at this time. It's very hard to know what their lives were like from their perspective. We often have kind of outsider sources or these repressive sources that we can kind of read against the grain to find information about them. So that's kind of a common practice here. But then that's another reason that the blues songs by these women, many songs they wrote themselves, are such important historical sources, because, you know, this is this rare moment in which women are often, you know, writing about their own experiences. And of course, they're very sophisticated and strategic. Sometimes they're, you know, performing other personas. We shouldn't assume every song they write is about their own experiences. But they give us a lot of information about different terminology that was used at the time, as we'll see. And the fabulous song people started with was Beady Women, which is referring to either bull dagger or bull dyker, which is another common term used at the time. Not always, but mostly used, referring specifically to more masculine women who are queer. All right. Okay, so then this brings us to some of the women, famous lady lovers in the popular entertainment industry. We have Ethel Waters, Gertrude Ma Rainey, and Bessie Smith. So these were three incredibly popular celebrities in the early 20th century. They sold thousands of records. Especially Ma Rainey had been performing literally for decades before she was supposedly discovered by the white-run record industry in the North and began recording for them. So these are women who, before they became recording artists in the Northern music industry, they were performing in often large vaudeville troupes, touring the South, often in large numbers, just to kind of have strength in numbers to avoid violence, often performing under large canvas tents. And, you know, it was also very common to have drag performers with them. So there'd be a big troupe. The main performer would be a blues singer. And then there would be dancers, there'd be comedians. There might be some kind of gimmicky acts with, you know, like comedians and animals or something like that. But then there was also often male impersonators and female impersonators as well. In fact, Little Richard got his start in a similar type of milieu as a drag queen performing under Southern vaudeville shows. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to turn first to Ethel Waters, and she gets her start in the record industry in the early 20s. And so she actually is one of the few women I'll be talking about who didn't come from the South. She grew up in Philadelphia, but she actually became famous for singing songs about the South, since they were very popular with Southern migrants who were kind of disappointed by the North and missed life in the South. And she notably records for one of the only record companies that was Black-owned, that was briefly around in the early 20s, called Black Swan Records. And they were, as many Black middle-class folks were at this time in the Jim Crow era, pretty focused on respectability, right? Kind of as a strategic way to, you know, be seen as fully human and to gain rights in upward mobility at this time. So there was a lot of focus on being respectable. And of course, this was challenging because the blues often talked about very matter-of-fact issues. There's a lot of songs that talk about sex, that talk about everyday life in ways that weren't really seen as quote-unquote respectable. But Ethel Waters, perhaps because she was from the North, perhaps because she was thin and she was seen as kind of sophisticated in a way that Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey weren't, she was able to record on Black Swan. Bessie Smith actually auditioned for this record company, and in the process of auditioning, at one moment, she had to clear her throat, and she said, "Hold on, let me spit." And that so offended the men who ran this record company that at that moment alone, they decided not to sign her. And the sad part is she went on to become so incredibly successful that if they had signed her, they probably wouldn't have had to, close up shop after a couple of years. But unfortunately, she goes on to make, money for white-owned record companies who really didn't have any issues around, respectability in the same way that the Black companies did, such as the short-lived Black Swan. But the other thing about Ethel Waters is that she had a girlfriend whose name was also Ethel. So her girlfriend was named Ethel Williams in the early 20s. They were known as the two Ethels. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the two of them together. The reason I had the artist create a whole bunch of different images of women on the cover of my book kind of together is because, unfortunately, in the process of looking for photos, it's very rare to find photos of these women together, and to even find many sources where they talk about their relationships, right? It was very unlikely for people to really openly talk about queerness at this time. But we know, especially through the amazing oral histories done by a woman named Mabel Hampton from the Lesbian History Archives, she talked about how, everybody knew the two Ethels. Everybody knew they were oftentimes having lovers' quarrels on the street in Harlem. They kind of had a reputation. And because this was the era of vaudeville in which it was normal for there to be a singing act and then a dancing act and then a comedic act, it was totally acceptable for Ethel Waters to say, "Oh, well, my girlfriend," well, not my girlfriend, but to say, "I know somebody who's a dancer who should be a dancer in my tour." And so that way she was able to get her girlfriend to go on tour with her, so they were able to enjoy that experience together. And just to give you one brief example of one of her songs, as I mentioned, she was from the North, but she kind of became known for singing songs about the South. And so this is just one example of one of her songs. Also, trains, travel, mobility are very kind of broad themes in classic blues songs as well. And classic blues is a term kind of referring to, it's often also called kind of vaudeville blues, blues that's been very kind of influenced by the entertainment world, as opposed to kind of a solo guy playing country blues with a acoustic guitar strapped to his back, who was seen as kind of the more authentic blues figure, whereas the women were often associated more with, the entertainment industry. And so they were seen as kind of, not taken as seriously by blues scholars and things like that, or I should say male blues scholars at least. So this is just a song where Ethel again is kind of performing herself as a Southerner, talking about how she wants to go back home. And since so many fans of the blues were folks from the South who'd moved to the North, she became incredibly popular for singing songs basically about the Great Migration, right, during the Great Migration. And then, so I, of course, had a question when I was doing this research, which was, well, what did the men who ran Black Swan Records think of the fact that Ethel Waters was queer and that she had a girlfriend who she went on tour with? Unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to find that type of very specific information when you're, studying 100 years ago. But I was able to find this. So this is basically a fake promotion piece that was written about how, incredibly desirable and fabulous Ethel Waters was, and how every stop on tour they went, there was various men professing their love to her, saying that they wanted to marry her. And so she had to sign a contract saying that she wouldn't get married for at least a year so that she could, devote herself to her career. So this was a time which basically, for any woman, if you were married, you were expected to not have a career, right? That was seen as kind of the end of one's career. You're supposed to go off into the private sphere and start having babies, I suppose. So here we have this idea of, yes, it says up the second paragraph, some lovesick swains have fallen in love with Miss Waters' picture appearing in the newspaper. Others have been captivated by her voice and her personal charm. although she travels with a maid, it might be necessary for her to employ a private social secretary. So yeah, so this piece about her traveling with her maid, I was like, are they trying to say that that's Ethel Williams and they're trying to put her in this other more innocent role? Anyways, I still have a lot of questions about this source, but I'm pretty sure that it was kind of, created to present her as heterosexual and available to men. So very much, not the scenario in the moment. In fact, actually, she later in life said, her biographer, Donald Bogle, had an amazing quote from a friend of hers who once said to her, "I'm a lesbian and the best who ever did it." So that's about as overt as it gets for this time period. All right. Then we'll talk a little bit about Bessie Smith, and then after that, I think it'll probably be time if we'll have some more music. So this is a still from the film Bessie that came out a decade ago now, How Time Flies, starring Queen Latifah, who did an amazing job performing in her role here. Highly recommend seeing this film if you have not seen it. And so Bessie Smith was someone who, we do know of a few women she was involved with. So she, like many women at this time, was married to a man and yet still had relationships with women on the side. So this was very, very common of queer women at this time. And I think especially for Black women, it was a way to kind of, keep one foot in kind of the world of like heterosexual respectability within the community and still being able to kind of take part in the relationships that gave her pleasure. So she... The power dynamics we might see is a little bit problematic today, but she had multiple affairs with different chorus girls in her show. So that was kind of, that was the world she existed in. So much so we know about two different women. There was a woman named Lillian and a woman named Marie that she was involved with on the road. And there's this amazing quote where one of the women, so backstage from a show, Bessie Smith approached her and she was, trying to kind of kiss her in public. She was trying to take part in some public display of affection. And the woman, she felt uncomfortable with that. So she kind of pushed back. She was not interested. And Bessie Smith gave her this ultimatum and she said to her, "I've got 12 women on this show and I can have one every night if I want it." So I don't know if that was actually true or not, but it's such a great line. Yeah, when I read that, it just kind of blew my mind and just made me, think about the past and the entertainment industry in a very different way. There was another woman she was involved with on her show who, unfortunately, one night they were having a nice time together in their room in a boarding house where they were staying. There was like specific boarding houses that catered to Black performers since they couldn't stay in hotels in the Jim Crow era. And her husband, unfortunately, actually came and found them. And the whole group had to kind of like get on the road really fast to escape him. Unfortunately, there was a lot of domestic violence between Bessie Smith and her husband, mostly over jealousy of them both having affairs with other women constantly. So she's having relationships with different women in her show. And so I kind of assumed that these women who were, so incredibly successful that we knew about their relationships with other women, I kind of had assumed at the beginning that, maybe they felt more comfortable being more open about this, right? Because they're in this kind of exceptional position of, being someone who's making a lot of money for a record company. So maybe they're able to kind of get away with their queerness in a more open or public way. But unfortunately with Bessie Smith, I found that even though she didn't really seem to be too concerned with respectability, she still did not really openly, beyond kind of the kind of safety of the entertainment industry, right? She was comfortable kissing her lover backstage at a performance, but that's really about as far as it went. And so I'm going to show you the lyrics from the kind of the queerest song we have by Bessie Smith. And we'll be hearing this song as well. So this is Foolish Man Blues from 1927 here. So you can just take a moment to read the lyrics here. So we have this interesting kind of device that we often see in blues songs where it's very common for a woman to say that there's one or two things that I can't understand, and then go on to talk about something kind of taboo in a way that shows they very much do understand it. They are very familiar with it, and perhaps they're bringing it up to tell you about it too. But it's kind of this nice way of kind of getting to not be explicitly queer, right? So it's kind of like, some people might understand that just by her bringing up this subject, it means that she has a relationship to it. But, for people who don't agree with it, they could also take it in, the negative way it kind of comes across here. So, so here we have her kind of, bringing up the subject of gender transgression, but, not necessarily in a, supportive way. So there'll be some other songs that I'll be discussing that are much more kind of explicitly queer in ways that are a little bit more empowering than this one. But so this is the queerest song we have about Bessie Smith.
All right, we're gonna have some more music and then I'll be back again. Thank you so much, everybody.
So, you know what I really, really, really don't like?
What?
And it's also the name of a Lindsay Lohan song. Rumors. Started. I'm gonna tell y'all a story. Just vibe with me for a second. I'm not gonna drink beer. Went out last night, had a great big fight. Everything seemed to go on wrong. I looked up, to my surprise, the gal I was with was gone. Where she went, I don't know. I mean to follow everywhere she goes. Folks say I'm crooked. I didn't know where she took it. I want the whole world to know. They say I do it. Ain't nobody caught me. Sure got to prove it on me. Went out last night with a crowd of my friends. They must be women, 'cause I don't like no men. I wear a collar and a tie, make the wind blow. All the while they say I do it. Ain't nobody caught me. You sure got to prove it on me. Take it away, y'all. Now, who around here is going around saying I'm gay? Y'all know that ain't true. Y'all gotta prove it on me. It's alright, I like a pretty face sometimes. And a little beer. Beer don't make you gay. Maybe it does. Oh, baby, you sure got to prove it on me. They say I do it. Ain't nobody caught me. You sure got to prove it on me. Went out last night with a crowd of my friends. We must be women, 'cause I don't like no men. I wear my clothes like a fan. Talk to a girl like any old man. They say I do it. Everybody call me. You sure got to prove it on me. You sure got to prove it on me. You sure got to prove it on me.
It's getting worse every day. They act like a bunch of women. They gab and gab and gab away. Listen, there's two things got me puzzled. Two things I don't understand. Well, there's two things got me puzzled. Two things I don't understand. It's a mannish acting woman and a skipping, twisting woman acting man. I think that's me. Oh, I used to love a man. He made my poor heart ache. Oh, I used to of a man, he made my poor heart ache. He was as crooked as a corkscrew and meaner than a copper-headed snake. Oh, I know a certain man that spent a whole year running round. Play, John. I know a certain man, he spent a year running a poor gal down. When that girl finally let him kiss him, the fool went in, gabbed it all over town. That's the blues.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be back. How amazing are these singers and performers and the piano player? So fabulous. My goodness. I can't believe this is my first time I'm doing a book event that has live music. It should always happen. All right, so now we're going to turn to Ma Rainey. We just heard fabulous rendition of her song, Prove It On Me Blues, which I'm going to be talking about. So Ma Rainey was known as the Empress of the Blues, as I mentioned. She kind of got her start in vaudeville in the South, and she was performing in the South for decades before she started recording for Northern music industries. And she is someone who we know that she was married to men twice. She often also talked about how she had a special appreciation for younger men, much younger men. But unlike some of the other women I've talked about, we don't actually know of any specific women that she had relationships with, although there are some rumors. There's these longstanding rumors about her and Bessie Smith. Some people talk about how they had kind of like a mentor-mentee relationship. Even one of Ma Rainey's musicians thought that there was something going on between the two of them. But, the two of them just laughed about that. It didn't seem like that actually happened. It seemed like it was a rumor that people often brought up. But there's this other fascinating rumor story that one night after a show in Chicago, Ma Rainey invited all the girls from her show to relax and socialize with her. And just as the party was kind of heating up, allegedly someone just kind of maybe started to peel off some of their clothes. It seemed like things were about to get a little bit risque. The police showed up, trying to break up this unruly party. I guess somebody had complained about the noise. And then the rumor goes that the police actually chased Ma Rainey out of the house. She tripped and fell down fell down the stairs. She was arrested, and Bessie Smith had to bail her out of jail the next day. When I was a kind of a naive grad student, I thought maybe I could go to Chicago and could find evidence whether or not this happened, some sort of police records or something. Of course, I was never able to find any such sources. So we just know this to be a rumor, kind of a urban legend. But then some people say that this is the rumor that kind of led to the creation of the song Prove It On Me Blues, which is one of the more explicitly queer songs and the queerest blues song by a very well-known and successful blues singer, Ma Rainey. So she has this song from 1928, which we just heard a fabulous rendition of, where she's basically kind of teasing the audience with her queerness. She doesn't explicitly come out. It's more about kind of bringing up the topic and then just saying, they say I do it. Ain't nobody caught me. You have to prove it on me. But then there's this other lines, she went out with a crowd of her friends. They must have been women because she doesn't like men. She even mentions that she wears a collar and a tie, right? Talking about the more mannish clothing that some women wore at the time. So this song becomes quite popular, though unfortunately we really don't know much about how it was received. We haven't been able to find any, reviews about it from the time period itself. But we do have this one ad that was created to sell the song, to sell the record by her record company. And this is an ad that was published in the Chicago Defender, which, while obviously a Chicago-based newspaper, was a national newspaper for African Americans at the time that people would read all over the country. So this is the ad that runs in the newspaper, and it features Ma Rainey here. So usually she's presented, we only have a few images of her, but usually she, has a more feminine presentation. She has on a dress and jewelry. But here we see her wearing kind of masculine, mannish menswear from the waist up, where she has a fedora on. She has a suit jacket. She has a suit, a vest and tie. And then it's hard to see in this image, but the two thinner women next to her have similar outfits on. And so basically at this time, even if you were still wearing, a skirt and maybe even, a more feminine shoe, if you were wearing menswear from the waist up, that was very much, a sign of queerness, of lesbianism in the 1920s here. And so this image is of her and a couple women kind of standing on a street corner, a kind of image we might associate often more with sex work here, but here it's kind of representing, queer women or gender transgressing women. And then even though there's no policeman in the song itself, the creators of this ad choose to represent a policeman in the background, kind of even holding up a baton, kind of in a phallic way, gesturing as if, he might actually use it against the women. So it seems as if like the record company might be kind of inserting their own opinions on potentially like the criminality of queerness here. But also it was often common to kind of create a scenario where it's kind of like, oh, what's happening here? You better buy the record so you can, find out what Ma Rainey is up to, which is also kind of what the text here is saying. So so this is definitely one of the first sources that we might see as part of Black popular culture. This record, this cultural product here, and this ad is also kind of playing up the queerness in the song itself. And again, it seems as if perhaps it was because there was no specific woman that we associate Ma Rainey having a relationship with that she felt comfortable kind of, putting such a queer song out. Because there are a couple other more explicitly queer songs that sometimes were recorded, but were never actually, sold as records. The most infamous would be the song Shave 'Em Dry by Lucille Bogan, which feel free to look that one up. You will definitely enjoy it. But a song like that was not actually like sold as a record for people to purchase. But this is one of the more explicitly queer songs by a famous blues singer that was a popular product. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm just going to talk a little bit as well about some of the incidences that came up when women traveled through the South at this time. Some folks such as Alberta Hunter, who actually came from Memphis, and she moved to Chicago at a very young age. She refused to tour in the South. She had no desire to go to the South and, deal with the repercussions in terms of violence and discrimination at this time. But, many other performers, they were from the South. That's where their people were. They wanted to bring their music to them. And so they kind of put up with the various challenges of touring in the South. One thing that both Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey were able to do, due to their success, was actually purchase their very own train cars. So they were able to purchase their own Pullman train cars or buses so that they didn't have to deal with the indignities of the Jim Crow railroad system. Oftentimes, the car that African Americans could ride in would be one that all this soot would fly into, and it would mess up your clothes, and it was just, indignity piled on top of indignity. So one way some of these very successful women were able to get around this was by having their own train cars, and that also would give them some privacy on the road as well for potential queer behaviors or other activities like that. But I just wanted to read a little bit specifically from this one incident featuring Bessie Smith. Okay, so this is about a night in 1927 when Bessie Smith and her review were touring through the South. One hot night in July 1927 in Concord, North Carolina, Bessie Smith's traveling review pitched their tents for another filled-to-capacity show of over 1,500 fans. It was so warm under the tent, compounded by the crowds and the heat from the electric lights, that one of Smith's musicians came close to passing out halfway through the show, so he put down his instrument and stepped outside. He was soon confronted by the jarring sight of a half-dozen white-hooded Ku Klux Klan members attempting to pull the tent stakes up in order to collapse the canvas. He ran back inside as the show ended. Sorry, I'm leaving you hanging here at the last moment. And told Bessie Smith what he had seen. Smith seemed fearless as she ran towards the intruders, stopping within 10 feet of them. She confronted the Klan with her hand on her hip and shook her fist at them. According to her cousin's recollection, Smith shouted, "What the fuck do you think you're doing? I'll get the whole damn tent out here if I have to. You just pick up them sheets and run." The Klansmen, apparently too stunned to move, just stood there and gawked. Smith hurled obscenities at them until they finally turned and disappeared quietly into the darkness. Then she returned to the tent as if nothing had happened and as if she had just settled a routine matter. So, we have this amazing moment here of Bessie Smith fighting the KKK to rid them from her show so she can, sing her songs to her fans. These are the types of, everyday events that would occur to women who, dared to just be themselves and to bring their music on the road through the South. So touring the South at this time could be very treacherous. I'm going to move back here to keep on topic here. Similar things happened with Ethel Waters and her band. Since there was such a horrible problem with lynching or vigilante mob violence in the South, particularly targeting Black men, that she actually had a very hard time finding Black male musicians who wanted to tour in the South with her. So this is a story from the Chicago Defender about how, nobody in her band wants to actually tour in the South. And so she had a very challenging time being able to go down there herself, since they had trouble finding accommodations and there was just a fear of violence. In fact, one time they were playing a theater in Macon, Georgia, and the body of a young man who had just been lynched was actually thrown into this theater. So, these are the types of incidents that are occurring that are incredibly traumatic for women who are just, trying to make a living and share their very popular music with people. So again, the incredible bravery and courage of these women to kind of go forth in this horrible scenario here. All right, lightening things up a little bit more. Another song that we're going to be hearing next is Ma Rainey's Sissy Blues. So I want to bring this in a little bit here. This song is pretty amazing because it's just, again, it shows very much how just kind of matter-of-fact issues were talked about in the blues, topics that often didn't, necessarily come up in, the general public sphere or in popular culture. So this is a song about how, Ma Rainey's man has left her for a sissy whose name is Miss Kate. But she just talks about it, in a very matter-of-fact way. It's kind of like, well, this is my new competition, she's got it going on. That's understandable. So again, we're seeing kind of just like the visibility of different queer terminology that's emerging at this time. So I have a label here from the song itself, and then there's another song underneath it called Sissy Man Blues by Kokomo Arnold. So there was also quite a few queer blues songs sung by men at this time, and this is one of them. And it kind of just talks about something very common that George Chauncey also talks a lot about in his book, Gay New York, this idea that for a man who's interested in women, if a woman isn't available, a sissy will do, a fairy will do instead. And that man wouldn't necessarily see himself as queer even, right, for taking part in such a relationship, as long as he was the top. Basically, that was kind of the key point here. But yeah, so we have a lot of songs kind of just matter-of-factly talking about, issues of gender transgression. And again, kind of through this, we can see the new terminology, the new kind of sexual identity categories that are emerging through learning about them through blues songs like this. So we'll hear a rendition of this one shortly. And then the other song we're going to hear that I just want to mention, this is not necessarily a queer song by Bessie Smith, but this is one of my favorite songs by her. I often play it in my U.S. history classes and my women's history classes because she's just really, kind of despite the racism, despite the colorism, despite the misogyny, she just is talking about how, she knows she's a good woman. She knows she can get plenty of men. She wants to have adventures. She's a young woman. She's not ready to settle down. She wants to go out and see the world. So it's just it's a really incredible song. So we will be hearing that one because she only has one very explicitly queer song, the one we already heard, Foolish Man Blues. But I also want to share another of her very empowering songs with y'all as well. And then I also just wanted to mention Lucille Bogan. So she sang the song that we heard at the very beginning, Beady Women Blues, referring again to Bold Dagger or Bold Dyker, common terminology again used for queer and especially masculine queer women in the first half of the 20th century. And this is probably one of like the most explicitly queer blues songs out there. And then it's interesting because it's actually sung by a woman we really don't know that much about. She has, I hope there's probably somebody out there working on a biography of her right now, and I'll be very excited to read it, but we don't know too much about Lucille Bogan, who also performed and recorded under the name Bessie Jackson. But she sang a lot of songs about sex work. She had a song called Baking Powder Blues, which I assume might be about drugs. The song Beady Women, just to name a few here. So she is definitely seen kind of as one of the more outlaw blues singers who, wasn't as much in kind of the mainstream music industry as somebody like Bessie Smith was. But yeah, she's very much had this blatant kind of I don't care attitude. recorded over 60 songs on what were known at the time as race records labels. This is, of course, the racially segregated category of the record industry, which will be renamed rhythm and blues by the 1940s. But in this early period, it's known as race records, and she's very popular within this milieu. So these are the lyrics to the song that we heard at the beginning. And this is just such a wonderful song, right? Coming a time, bulldaggers, they're not going to need men. The way they treat us is a low down, dirty sin. There's also a lot of matter-of-fact discussions around domestic violence in blues songs. Gladys Bentley, who was known to sing very queer songs in kind of speakeasy spaces. She didn't really record explicitly queer songs, but she did record songs that critiqued domestic violence and, other kind of feminist issues like that. So this is the song that's, it's hard to see exactly what her position, the singer's position is in relation to BD women, right? Does she identify as one? Does she desire them? Is she just inspired by them? But, regardless, the fact that she's, mentioning them, she's talking about, gender transgression in song and seeing them as, women who, should be held up and should be emulated and should be, brought into the larger conversation. I think that's, she was very, very ahead of her time for singing and recording songs like this. And this is also going on, once we get into the mid-30s, we're deep into the Great Depression, right? So this is another moment in all times of economic downturn, things tend to get a little bit more conservative. And of course, during the Great Depression, there was a lot of focus on, men being emasculated, right? Men are the ones who need jobs, not women. And we're beginning to see some kind of pushback to all the queer visibility that emerged in the Prohibition era, the post-Prohibition era. That's when we get the laws on the books that say it's like disorderly for gay people to gather in bars or places where alcohol is served. And that's what leads to the eventual police raids, which eventually lead to something like Stonewall, where people are fighting back against it, right? So kind of that little bit more historical context there for y'all. All right, and then of course I had to talk about Gladys Bentley. Folks who came out to the last talk by my fabulous colleague Jillian Roger, I'm sure also heard about Gladys Bentley, but she's definitely one of my favorite figures from this period. She's definitely the person. Talk about being out of the closet. That's kind of like a post-Stonewall concept. Actually, in the 1920s, and George Chauty talks about this in Gay New York as well. I love this so much for the conversation wasn't about coming out into like the straight world and like introducing yourself to straight people. It was about coming out into the queer world, right? This idea of, getting kind of copying the idea of like, a debutante ball, like kind of having your coming out party to welcome you into queer spaces. So it's more about being focused on your relationship to the queer community than the straight world, right? But so Gladys Bentley is one of the most out there queer figures of this time. She wore men's clothing both on and off stage. People put terms on her like, drag king or male impersonator, but she was just being herself. She was a masculine woman, just kind of, being herself. She wasn't really performing as a character. And she was known for, changing the lyrics of popular songs to make them very dirty. And everybody would sing along because like they were familiar with the song and they enjoyed the new twist on them. And then most infamously, she allegedly had a marriage ceremony. We don't know actually who her partner was. We just know that she was a white woman who was also a performer. But they allegedly, got married in Atlantic City. And in my book, I talk about many other similar cases of women often getting married, having a queer clergy member marry them. Sometimes people would change their names, change their name so it looked like one of them had. So the assumption was one of them was male, one of them was female, so that they could get a marriage certificate. And it really mostly seemed about just wanting to have this ceremony for people to, express their love together and have a celebration, just as weddings are still today. But, for women to be doing this, of course, 50, 60, 70 years, even longer before the passage of, same-sex marriage being legal is such a remarkable feat here. So I don't really think I have time to do it, but I'll just mention that there's a documentary you can see online. It's called Unladylike, and it's also under now the PBS American Experience series. It's like a 10-minute documentary on Gladys Bentley, and I'm one of the talking heads in it. So that's from back from 2019. So if you want to see what I look like before the pandemic, we're all so much cuter then. You can check that out. The 80s. And here's another fabulous picture of Gladys Bentley in her white tuxedo here. She went out, her mother lived in Los Angeles, and so by World War II, she had moved out to LA. She also performed a lot in famous lesbian bars in San Francisco, like Mona's. So she kind of, from coast to coast, she was a really big hit in the early to mid 20th century. And then just kind of going along with the kind of speakeasy rent party theme, I just wanted to talk about one other woman before I wrap things up. So this is a story connected to Mabel Hampton again. So Mabel Hampton was a Black working class woman from North Carolina who moves to Harlem. And the reason we know so much about her is actually that she was Joan Nestle, who was one of my femme icons who starts the Lesbian History Archive. I believe she was Joan Nestle's mother's personal maid. And so Joan got to know her through that relationship. And then she learned that she had been involved in the queer world of Harlem in the 1920s. And so she did all these oral histories. And so it's very rare that we would actually have oral histories by, not a famous, but just kind of an everyday working class woman from this world. But kind of due to this relationship, we were able to do so. So what you're seeing here is an invitation to a rent party in 1932. One day, Mabel Hampton was waiting for the bus, and a beautiful woman came up to her and gave her this card and was like, "Come to my party." And so one reason I love this story is because it's about, two queer women meeting on the street, meeting in public, something we tend to associate more with, queer men. So they have this kind of moment of flirtation. And then luckily, Mabel Hampton decides to take Lillian Foster up on this, and she shows up at her party. And the two of them go on to be a couple who lived together for over 30 years. Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't have too many photos of the two of them together, but here you can see them. And Mabel Hampton also talks about working in different queer clubs in Coney Island, in Greenwich Village. She talked about how the popular comedian Jackie Mabley, who will later go on to be known as Moms Mabley, through a lot of queer parties that she would attend. She talked about how all the bulldaggers and their girlfriends would show up to the parties. Sometimes women would wear dresses, and then once they got to the parties, they'd feel more comfortable to change into pants. It was very important for women at this time often to socialize in each other's homes so they would have, feel safety in those spaces. Oftentimes they didn't feel comfortable or welcome in other spaces. So socializing in homes was much more common. There really weren't bars that welcomed queer Black women until the 1950s and 60s, really. So in this earlier period, people often prefer to socialize at home. So I guess I'm going to wrap things up here. I just have some takeaways, and then I just have one more slide after this. So just some of the larger points I've been trying to make this evening. In the 20s and 30s, Black women blues singers who loved women were some of the most successful artists in this country, right? These are women who are selling thousands and thousands of records. They're touring the country. They have their own private train cars to do so with. But they still have to deal with the indignities of the Jim Crow era. Sometimes when they went to record in the North, they'd still have to walk through, the back entrance, even though they were going there to record their successful records. So, again, this kind of highlights the tensions of this era here. And then, as I've mentioned, the entertainment industry is really important in creating the queer world we have today, I would say. So many people met in this world and played a really pivotal role in creating kind of alternatives to work for Black women that weren't identic work or being, a maid or doing laundry. So having the opportunity to tour the country and meet other women and learn about queer identity and relationships. We've talked about some blues songs that kind of introduce queer topics in subtle and strategic ways, right? So they could appeal both to queer members of the audiences and to straight people as well. We talked about how touring the South at this time was, very dangerous and required multiple forms of resistance to the racial hierarchy. Sometimes they encountered violence. And again, having the safety of their own ways to travel was one way to kind of get around that. But yeah, overall, it really 1925 to 2025, right? I'm talking about 100 years here. For this long, Black queer women have been important makers and shapers of American culture. So we have this long legacy, right, to look back on. It wasn't just the last couple decades of queer history that we can draw from. We can turn back 100 years to learn about really important Black culture makers who are really at the center of American culture at this time. And, just to end things, even in times, it's important to remember that even in times such as the 20s and the 30s, when the state did not support or validate queerness, LGBTQ plus Americans have found ways to survive and thrive and to record their histories, that we will continue to do so. that. Thank y'all. And then again, I just want to say thank you. Also, if you want to get my book, here's a discount code for 30% off. Here's my email if you want to reach out, or please come talk to me after this. And also, yes, again, I'm coming in October. There's going to be a fabulous exhibit on the gay Harlem Renaissance at the New York Historical. It's going to feature a virtual blues club, and I have curated the music for that. So I'm very excited about that. So thank you so much for coming out. And now we get to hear a couple more fabulous songs.
Hello, Central. It's about to drive me wild. Can I get that number, or will I have to wait a while? I dreamed last night I was far from home. Woke up and found my man in a sissy's arms. Hello, Central. It's about to drive me wild. Can I get that number, or will I have to wait a while? Let me tell you something about sissies now. Some are young and some are old. My man says sissies got good jelly roll. Hello, Central. It's about to drive me wild. Hey, can I get that number, or will I have to wait a while? Take it away, Dion. His name is Miss Kate. He shook that thing like jelly on a plate. Hello, Central. It's about to drive me wild. Can I get that number, or will I have to wait a while? Now, all the people ask why I'm all alone. A sissy shook that thing and took that man from home. Oh, hello, Central. It's about to drive me wild. Can I get that number, or will I have to wait a while? Happy Pride.
Well, thank you guys for having us. It's been such a wonderful night. Bessie Smith is one of my all-time favorite singers. I learned about her through my grandmother when I was taking a liking to music growing up, and we actually had some of the records in our home, and I spent a lot of time with this music. It went over my head as a child, but now as I'm learning them through the spectrum of my own queerness, it has been so great to revisit this music tonight, and I want to thank you all for having us. So this is Young Women's Blues. I'm not a young woman. Woke up this morning when chickens were crowing for days. Felt on the right side of my pillow, my man had gone away. By his pillow, he left a note. Sorry, Jane, girl, you got my goat. No time to marry, no time to settle down. I'm a young woman, ain't done running round. Yes, I'm a young woman, no time settling down. Some people call me a hobo, they call me a bum. Nobody knows my name, nobody knows where I'm from. I'm just as good as any woman in this town. I ain't no high yellow, I'm a nice deep dark shade of brown. I ain't gonna marry, ain't gonna settle down. I'm gonna drink good whiskey and run these browns down. See that long, lonesome road ahead. Lord, I know it's gotta end. And I'm a good woman, and I can get plenty men. Yes, I can.